We're joined now by Vivian Balakrishnan, Singapore's Minister for Foreign Affairs, live with us here in the studio at the SGX. Minister, great to see you. I have to say, this is such a nice change because you're the first live guest we've had in person in about 18 months with us. So welcome.
Well, great to be back
and great
after
to have you
18 months and in person.
Indeed, yeah. What a nice change. So positive. So let's start with Kamala Harris's visit to Singapore. How did that go?
It went very well.
Yeah.
It was a very substantive, engaging, and really a great visit. I mean, in a sense, she's building on the past enduring relationship that the United States has always had with us. We reviewed the economic ties, and you know the Americans remain the largest source of FDI into Singapore. Our trade volume doubled since the signing of the free trade agreement between the US and Singapore, which, by the way, was the first Asian country they signed a free trade agreement with. So on that front, it's been all positive. Yeah. Needless to say, on the defense front, it's also been excellent. And, we had the visit by Lloyd Austin just a couple of weeks ago. So that was reviewing the current account. But equally, there was a good focus on future elements of that account relationship. So what we're going to do together on the pandemic, what we're going to do on the digital economy, on cybersecurity, the green economy, and even in outer space. So it was a good visit that looked at both as I said, the excellent state of economic and defense ties, and also look prospectively at some very good, interesting areas.
That's good to know, and especially the space part, which we might be able to get into a little bit later. But all this overshadowed her visit, of course, by the situation in Afghanistan, right?
Yes.
Which was happening as she was here and continues through now. And Sri and I were very curious and also very pleased to note that Singapore is rendering her offered assistance, one of your A330 tanker / cargo aircraft. Has that been accepted? Are they going to use it?
Yes, it has been accepted.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, this trip was planned even before Afghanistan descended into the current situation. But I think the Americans also wanted to show that they could walk and chew gum.
At the same time.
And it was good that they proceeded with the visit. And I'm also very happy that, Vice President dealt with the issue upfront in all her interactions, both private and public. And the point is this: President Biden actually inherited a very difficult situation. And I think now there's no doubt that the outcome was inevitable. What was surprising was the speed at which events unfolded. And the point, therefore, which she was emphasized repeatedly, was that she, I think to quote her own words, laser focused on fulfilling their commitments to get their own citizens, as well as the Afghan citizens who had worked closely with the Americans and their allies out of Kabul.
So I don't mean to put you in a tough position, but you are the foreign minister. The speed with which the Taliban literally took over the country in just a matter of weeks, one, and also the process, the execution of withdrawal has been attracting a lot of criticism, and that falls on President Biden. In your discussions with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, did this whole issue of what on earth happened with intelligence? Was this a failure? What did that come up?
Well, we didn't get into intelligence details, but I would say everyone was surprised at how quickly things unfolded, things went wrong. But in a sense, if you take a step back, let's go back 20 years. Why did this happen? It happened because of 9/11. And it was clear, and we were convinced too, that Afghanistan at that point in time was a safe haven for terrorists. And it's worth remembering, even in our case, our own local terrorist groups had links with Al-Qaeda. So that was why America had to go in. But I'll let you in on another point. Sure. And, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and I remember even all the way back, I've been in politics now for almost 2 decades. He always made this point that the terrorists are going to cause a lot of pain, are going to cause us to shed a lot of blood, But actually, it is a strategic cul-de-sac, meaning they're not going to change the world. It's not as if there's some new technology or new business model or a new way of organizing society which would bring us to a new horizons. And therefore, and in fact, he subsequently said it publicly as well, a nation-building effort in Afghanistan would be a distraction and not a strategic imperative. And I think somewhere along the way, events have unfolded and confirmed his view. As to why things move so quickly, I think it really illustrates that once a fighting force loses its resolve, forgets what it's fighting for, and then equally the question of leadership, then things will collapse, and they'll collapse precipitously. And that, in fact, is what we have witnessed.
Yeah, I mean, literally, when the president absconds, I mean, what are the rest of the people to make of that, right?
Absolutely. And Minister, in the here and now, if I can get back to Singapore's commitment in the international airlift, if the RSAF aircraft is deployed, then will it be used to evacuate at-risk Afghans from Kabul? What would be their end destination, or would it be used to refuel or offer logistical support to this international effort?
Well, you know, it's a very versatile aircraft. It's an A330. It's called a multi-role tanker transport. So it's capable of multiple missions, and that's why it's relevant for this mission. I think right now, even if you follow the CNBC reports, you will know that there is a whole logjam of people stuck in Qatar and trying to get across into Europe. So without getting to operational details, I mean, we'll work with the Americans as to how best to deploy that aircraft and to be useful. I mean, the key point is, you know, there is a humanitarian disaster unfolding. I can't, you know, even dream of how the nightmare the Afghan refugees have been through, and we just want to help.
How far will that commitment go, Minister? Have you had conversations with your allies and within the ministry about offering at-risk Afghans safe passage and safe haven here in Singapore?
Well, you know, we can't take refugees. We are perhaps the densest, most tightly packed place in the world. But we are certainly assisting our partners in helping to reduce the humanitarian burden on these very unfortunate people. It is very tough, and you know people yourself.
Absolutely.
Personally, yes. Of course. So, Minister, you know, the head of the UN World Food Program, David Beasley, talking about this unfolding humanitarian disaster in Afghanistan, starvation, disease, not least, of course, potential persecution for the people who are not able to get out. What kind of assistance is the government considering rendering to help ease the burden on the people? Because they've already had several years of obviously conflict, drought, economic deterioration. There's been a run on the currency. I mean, the place is literally falling apart.
Well, and don't forget COVID.
Of course, yes.
Right, so they too are facing a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if the Taliban is in charge, they've got to take responsibility for the people. And if it's one other lesson that has been learned, is that foreign interference doesn't work. In the end, the destiny of a people lies in the hands of its own people and its own leaders. So we'll wait and see. We hope Afghanistan will not revert to becoming a haven for terrorists. We hope the Taliban will fulfill what they have said, at least in the last few days.
Do you personally think that they are reformed, as they say they are?
I'm not in a position to assess that. You do realize 20 years means it's a new generation. The people who are speaking on TV now on behalf of Taliban were probably little kids when this evolved. So I think you'll have to judge them by their actions.
So a far-fetched question, but I need to at least attempt it. Is Singapore in any way in contact with any of the leadership of the Taliban, or in terms of rendering assistance, are you basically working through intermediaries and taking your lead from the West or from NATO or?
No, we're not in contact.
Okay.
But you know that we keep open channels,
Yeah.
and in due course, we will see. Okay. But as I said, let's judge people by their actions rather than words.
Okay. So I need to get to this very blunt question now, and this is very relevant to Singapore, if not Southeast Asia, right?
You're always blunt.
U.S. has exited. There's a vacuum. Let's leave aside the risk of what China may or may not do in Afghanistan. Yes. I think they're assessing a very fragile and unstable situation as well. With the U.S. exit and withdrawal from Afghanistan, does it leave Singapore more at risk, more vulnerable? Does it leave the region, Southeast Asia, more at risk and more vulnerable to terrorist attacks? Because as you suggested, look, they are in Afghanistan, they're based there, right? They could mass even further, and there are local sort of offshoots or affiliates in existence already. Southern Philippines, Indonesia.
Yes.
Are we more at risk and more at
Terrorism remains a clear and present danger. The difference, perhaps, if you go back 20 years, is that this is a disease that has metastasized. And you're right, in Southeast Asia, we are facing a clear and present danger.
More of a clear and present danger now with the U.S. out of Afghanistan?
I wouldn't relate it directly to the United States' presence or absence in Afghanistan, but the point is, within Southeast Asia, this is a clear and present danger. And if anything, over the past 2 decades, I think it has grown. So we cannot take this for granted.
Minister, can I get back to another crisis, a broader crisis than the global crisis, which is the pandemic?
Yes, we're not short of crisis.
No, of course. And the current, how can I characterize this, round of vaccine diplomacy that we are seeing play out in Vietnam as an example, is that vaccine diplomacy or vaccine one-upmanship? And what is going wrong with the COVAX and the Gavi platforms that were set up to avoid any mismatch and any deficits in the supply chain, especially for developing countries?
Well, I would frame it slightly differently. First is a vaccine necessity. I think with the advent of the Delta variant, and we all know its basic reproductive number is far higher than the original form. So first point is that vaccines are essential. And what this other point that has arisen is the fact that even countries which hitherto, like Vietnam, had successfully prevented major waves through basically very tight border closures. Those measures alone are not sufficient. So I would say, and I've been to Vietnam, I was there just 2 months ago, they do need vaccines, they do need to roll it out urgently, and I'm sure they're very happy that they're able to get vaccines from both the United States and China. In fact, the Vice President's additional 1 million, don't forget they've already been given 5 million doses from America. So in fact, it's 6 million doses from America over the last couple of months. And they will need it, they will need to deploy it. I don't think this is a question of vaccine diplomacy, it's vaccine necessity.
For Singapore specifically, are we turning the tide on COVID, or is Delta and possibly new variants a clear and present danger and a big risk to the recovery here?
I am very reluctant to say we turn the tide, because this virus, every time you think you've got it, it evolves something and the situation changes. So it calls for eternal vigilance. What I would say the biggest plus that we have is that we will very shortly reach 80% full vaccination, which is quite an achievement if you think about it, because we are unique in the world in being trying to be a low infected but high vaccinated regimes. Most parts of the world, you know, if you've been previously successful, vaccine rollouts have been rather slow. On the other hand, in other parts of the world, like US and EU, where infections have been high, vaccination rates have also been high. So first point is that what we are doing in Singapore is unique. Second point, however, is that even with 80%, that's still 1 million people without vaccines. And therefore, as we try to gradually and safely reopen society and reopen our borders, we will have quite a fight on our hands to keep the numbers down.
So then what is the government thinking? I would assume that it would be slightly north of 80, and it's really going to be hard to push it much higher. And then is the government considering or thinking about a booster shot, third shot?
It's something
after,
which
say, a lag of 6 to 8 months or whatever.
Yes, our doctors and scientists are looking at that.
Yeah.
As I can't remember, I've told you this before, but the coronavirus, which causes the common cold in all of us, we know that usually immunity wanes, the coronavirus. Now, I would not be surprised if the same thing happens with this particular coronavirus. So the point is, we will be guided by science, we will make decisions accordingly. And fortunately, in the case of Singapore, both in terms of our logistics, in terms of our population's acceptance of making decisions on the basis of science, that's very high. That's a big advantage.
Do we have to accept, Minister, that this virus will be endemic?
I said that 18 months ago. I'm afraid I'm right. It is endemic because the genie got out of the bottle. It spread, it infected too many of us. There are too many millions of people acting literally as a petri dish for the virus to continue to evolve.
But
So,
the issue and the challenge is really controlling the spread and ensuring that it is not life-threatening.
to minimize the loss of life. And that's why we do need to figure out how to live with this and how to operate with it and how to do things safely. And it is possible to do so, but it requires a high level of vigilance, of discipline, of cooperation. And again, as I've said 18 months ago, it's a test of not only your medical facilities, your logistics capability and supply chains, but ultimately of your social capital, trust within a society.
And herein lies the challenge, surely, because if this is such a dynamic situation, then when you look at recent action that the Singapore government has taken in easing certain travel restrictions to certain countries, albeit low-risk countries or no-risk countries, is there a risk that in hindsight that could be premature?
Well, that's why we're not going to go for a big bang. And you realize we state our principles. So for instance, we will only open to countries where there's relatively low infection rates, high vaccination rates. And we've got pretty accurate data because, we track everyone who enters in Singapore. We've got test results. So it's a fairly mathematical, rational risk management exercise. But we need to be prepared that at any time things can turn and we need to be able to react appropriately.
Mr. I need to ask you, there is a classified intelligence report sitting on President Joe Biden's desk as we speak.
Which I have not read.
Which you have not read, I'm sure you have not, which tries to get to the origin story of the virus. At this stage, is it useful or is it a distraction? Whether or not it ends up being from bats or lab, to know? Or do you think the portion that's going to become declassified and made known to the public is going to be so, not whitewashed, but watered down that it's really not going to make any difference at all? Potentially, this could be explosive if the declassified part points to China and to labs rather than bats.
Well, let me speak as a scientist or as a doctor. What we need is radical and complete transparency. Without everyone sharing the data and being able to analyze it critically, it'll be almost impossible to really get down to the bottom of this. Now, it is important. Etiology is important, not for political or diplomatic reasons.
But for the future.
It's for the future.
Indeed.
We need to know how these things happen, where the next outbreak is going to be, what the likely dynamics of these future pandemics will be. It is in the collective interest of all humanity. And I just wish that we could take politics and superpower rivalry out of this and just focus on science and health.
rationality.
and human welfare.
I couldn't agree more.
And let's say, if I may, Martin, on a very human level,
Yes.
what would be your message, Minister, to the many Indian, Malaysian, overseas workers, the work pass holders who have not been able to return home because of the restrictions in their country and the restrictions on returning as well, some of which have not returned home for almost 2 years now?
It's been a very traumatic period for everyone all over the world. You know, as foreign minister, I've lost count of the number of emails I've received, heartbreaking emails. My father, my grandfather, dying alone in ICU, and I can't be there for that final moment. I mean, you know, beyond the numbers, there is a human story behind every single one of them. So we're trying our best, but again, we have to respond to the way this pandemic evolves. So yes, we have strict controls. We have, as I said just now, a very mathematical, risk-stratified approach. And we hope people understand and will cooperate. Ultimately, look, people will not be queuing up to enter Singapore if we were not so safe to begin with. That's the point.
Okay.
So
If we could just very quickly get back to Afghanistan, we don't have that much time left, and picking up on this theme of the importance of knowing for the future. You know, the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan in terms of eyes, ears on the ground, sensors, etc., leaves them a bit blind, right? They are trying to let people think that, look, this over-horizon capacity from the UAE or Kuwait, etc., that's going to be enough to track how the terrorism threat develops in Afghanistan. I'm not so sure. In Singapore's case, 500 troops at one stage, part of ISAF, a good 6-7 years. It was training their dentists, I know that, reconstruction,
yes.
Their artillery forces, but also intelligence analysis. Does this, therefore, leave Singapore as well a bit blind to the terrorism threat that could build in Afghanistan again?
well, as I said, the threat is not just from Afghanistan. It's global, and certainly within Southeast Asia, there are significant hotspots. Now, without getting into details, again, believe me, we've got eyes open, certainly for the clear and present dangers that we face. So the point I'm leaving is that we are not taking this for granted.
Minister, Vice President Harris's visit just underscored just how closely and deeply aligned Singapore is with the United States. How then would you characterize the relationship with China?
We are in a somewhat unique position. United States is the largest foreign investor in Singapore. They are the third largest trading partner in goods. The United States is the top trading partner for services with Singapore. China is our biggest trading partner. We are also the largest foreign investor in China. So we've got skin in the game on both sides. The key message which we left with the Vice President was that it is essential for the United States and China to have very high-level discussions at the top level in order to build a working, viable, constructive relationship and to start to rebuild some of that strategic trust. If they are unable to do that, it'll be a very difficult situation, not only for Singapore, but in fact for the rest of Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. So we don't have a say, we have hopes, and all that little Singapore tries to do is to be relevant, to be useful, to be an honest broker, to convey suggestions if they are required or if they're willing to listen, and to show and to remind America and Americans that they are a welcome presence in Southeast Asia. They have a head start in terms of soft power and goodwill. They, in fact, have a head start economically. There are 5,500 American companies in Singapore which generate about over 200,000 jobs. Conversely, American exports and trade with Asia, 600,000 jobs back home.
I have to cut you off there, but the message is Singapore can punch above its weight diplomatically and commercially as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Minister Vivian Balakrishnan there, Singapore's Minister for Foreign Affairs.